Welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla, a sex-positive hour of talk about kink, sexual mores, and writing dirty words. So grab a cup of cocoa, your favorite easy chair, and the lube as we go sailing into the dark, sweet waters of all things naughty on Licking Non-Vanilla with your hosts Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian.
Hey everybody, welcome to Licking Non-Vanilla with me, Ralph Greco Jr. and
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian, from the wild and woolly lands of Eugene, Oregon.
he's all the way out there and I'm all the way here. We're across the country from each other, but not in our hearts. We're right next to each other in our hearts, right, Chris? That's what really
Absolutely,
matters, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. And Chris, when I first met Chris, he lived in the wild and woolly San Francisco Bay Area, didn't you?
Hmm? Yep,
And
exactly. I just left, like, God, it's been like a year.
yeah.
I moved up here, but yeah, I sort of graduated from San Francisco to Berkeley to Oakland to Richmond and then Vallejo, and now I'm here.
So if you follow that, that's almost the trail that the Zodiac Killer took. So,
Exactly. I had
you know,
I refuse to comment on that.
right. And if you notice when there's Zodiac killings, Chris and the Zodiac killings, Chris was never in the same place. They were never at the same place at the same time. So it's like Batman and Bruce Wayne.
Exactly.
You have to worry
Yep,
about that.
I take the fifth.
But you were how old were you during those killings? So like in the 70s, you were the 1970s, 71. How old were you? You were
I was an early bloomer.
right,
Yep,
right.
You know, just like,
early
you know,
killing, early serial killer.
I tell you, when you're 11 years old, reaching the pedals on the getaway car is a little bit challenging.
That's hard, but you still did it. You know.
I did it, pulled it off. Me and Ted Cruz and I, sort of like, did double shifts.
Right. There you go. Now, because San Francisco always reminds me of great times I spent with you there. I had some great times with you there, and I always love that city. And we have mutual friends that lived there at one point, and we had some good times. And but the city always has a certain patina of kink to me. So yeah, I mean that city was quite the place for fun and frolics at that time, right? I mean, you also had the Folsom Street Fair.
Oh God, yes.
Big kink, live kink event with all those people, and
it's gotten bigger.
I think, yeah, right. And I think you're right. I think because of the health of the LGBT community there at the time, which wasn't called that, of course, at the time, and the leather community and the gay, all that community, all those communities. That was a pretty wide open city for liberal kind of sexual expression,
Yep.
And you were right in the middle of it.
Well, I was there for a while. I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of dropped out in, I think that, early 2000s. But then I got back into it like about, maybe like 4 or 5 years later. And
Right.
it's always been very active. I think the reason why it kind of dried up, though, it still has like several public dungeons. And of course, Folsom Street has like 200,000 people who attend it. And there's still leather shops, like Mr. S is still there, and so forth. But I think because the cost of living has gotten so bad, all the freaks, weirdos, and kinky people just kind of like skip town because they can't afford to live there anymore.
Yeah, no kidding. Can you explore or tell the reason you got out of the community for a little while?
You're so sweet.
I don't want to pry if you don't want to say. But
No.
I was just wondering why you got out of it for a while.
I'm just so flattered you want to ask me. I mean, not really bad reason. It was just that my wife and I separated, and kink was, for me, kink at the time was more something fun to do with friends, and I didn't really have that big magnetic attraction to it. So it wasn't something that I longed for after we broke up. I just sort of like frankly wasn't interested in anymore, though I still hung on to quite a number of friends we had in common, and
right.
I definitely played afterwards, but it really wasn't something that I felt necessarily to keep on going. It wasn't I wasn't traumatic. I just wanted to try something else for a while.
Well, and I think because I think the show today is going to be about this, right? About entering into kinks and exploring them and stuff. But
Mhm.
and Chris and I have a nonfiction book coming out soon that
Whee!
explores straight stuff as well as kinks and how to get into them
Mhm.
and how to pursue them and safely, as we always say. But
Mhm.
I think there is a difference between people who have an interest and people who are lifestylers,
Mhm.
and both are fine, perfectly fine. But
Mhm.
there are a lot of different approaches to like anything, you know. But say someone had a passing interest in things that are a little bit what they would consider non-vanilla, for want of a better term, right? These days, how would one pursue a sexual interest that's not considered the norm? What do you think? How do we go out and find that these days? What do they do?
I always think that, personally, I think in person is better than online.
Yeah.
I mean, not to dish online, but the thing about online, initial communications can get really muddy. You get people who are like, self-proclaimed experts. They got people who are kind of like, behind keyboard,
Yeah.
kind of chauvinists and such.
Right.
It can be very intimidating, and frankly, there's a lot of bad information floating around. So I think the
Yeah.
best idea would be to attend a class at some of the various sex shops,
Mhm.
which and put these on periodically,
Right.
or better yet, going to a convention.
Right.
Again, they're a little pricey because you have to pay for like airfare and hotel and everything
Right.
else,
Right.
but way cheaper than some of these other kind of events. And the kink scene is usually pretty friendly towards new people. If you just simply said, "Yeah, I'm just curious and wanted to see what this is about," you're going to hear everything, and not necessarily in a bragging kind of way, but just they love to be able. One of the kinks about kink is very often they love to be educators. So they're not going to haul you off to their dungeon. It's more than likely that's like, well, we'll talk to you about endlessly about what we do and our experience and such. But I think it's actually quite lovely.
Yeah, I think that I agree. I think I would say this is probably true of anything that you want to pursue. It's probably best to do it in person, best you can, because you get
Mm-hmm.
hands-on experience, so to speak, and with kinks,
Mm-hmm.
that could be really fun. Or yeah, you at least meet people, and like the typical thing we talk about all the time is the munch, which is a bunch of
Oh yes.
people getting together, but in an innocuous way. They meet at a diner, or they meet at like the back room of a tavern, and there's usually no
Mm-hmm.
playing going on. They just get together and they socialize, and they kind of
Exactly.
get to know each other and
Mm-hmm.
see maybe what they're into. But usually there's nothing going on, and there's house parties that we both attended house parties, and
Mm-hmm.
so there's a lot of different ways, and it's not like Chris just said, it's not as unusual or different than a normal way people hang out and find each other, people with the same
Mm-hmm.
interests. um
Mm-hmm.
Now Chris and I have both taught, and we've done this separately, although Chris has done it a hell lot more than I have, and we've done it together. We've taught at conventions, and like he
Mm-hmm.
said, generally the people we meet at convention, I'd say 99% of the time, are wonderful people, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really open and fun people, and like Chris said, they're usually really into sharing what they're into, because they
Mm-hmm.
this is what they're into, and it's not a mainstream thing, so they're not exploring it on a 24/7 basis, unless
Mm-hmm.
they're a lifestyler. So that's a whole different thing, and again, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so I think you're going to find a lot of very positive, open situations out there if you're going to explore.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about like somebody just going, well, I'm just going to go on FetLife and see what it's all about?
I use FetLife and I have a profile there.
Right.
I used to be more diligent about interacting and such. Um, Frankly, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm being negative, but FetLife is still kind of strikes me more often than not that a lot of quote unquote experts,
Yes. Yes, I'd
kind
say
of
that's true.
proclaiming, what something is or isn't or how to do something. And the problem is, kind of one of the inherent not problems, but one of the challenges about the internet is you never know exactly their expertise level. I
Right,
mean,
right.
yes, they can say that they went to these various conventions, but there's no one fact checking them.
Right.
That's why I think conventions and events are much better because the people who usually are teaching have been vetted. that
Yes.
they've taught many other times.
Right.
So you don't accidentally follow the advice of Lord Dom 369, who
Right.
teaches you how to do rope, and you end up hurting somebody.
Exactly.
Versus going
good
to a
point.
class with someone who has been doing rope bondage or something similar for 20 freaking years and taught like every convention on the planet. They know what they're talking about.
Yes.
And there's also a lot of kind of, for a better way of saying it, I guess it's kind of this, faux absolutism that kind of floats around where people, kind of like get off on being more intense than everybody else.
Yes, that's
So
that's
if
very
you just
true.
like to be spanked, if you just like to be, do something like age play, if you like doing something else, I mean, that's still, you're not going to find like open prejudice, but at the same time, sometimes people will say, they'll brag about, oh, yes, I had my left hand cut off in a scene.
Yeah,
It's
right.
just like,
right.
that's fine for you, but you can only do it twice.
Yeah, no
It's
kidding.
like,
Yeah.
it's like, everybody else is like going, but I just like to be bare bottom spanked. It's like,
Yeah.
they kind of look down on that sometimes. And, what's what I like about conventions too, you don't have that kind of, it's still there. It's not quite so, egregious, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There are some good places to learn about information. I mean, like Hot Movies, which we both write for.
Yeah, we write for Hot Movies. That's a
Kinkley.
great site. Kinkley,
Yep,
right?
Kinkley has all kinds of BDSM, tips and tricks. And that's I love their inclusiveness too. So it's really highly recommended. There's other sex ed sites that do it as well. But, I usually find that going to those rather than a public site like FetLife is much preferable.
Yeah, now FetLife is more like it's like a Facebook for kinkers,
Yep,
and
It is.
and the other things that Chris is referencing, there a lot of these are based on sexologists and clinical people who know what the hell they're talking about, and
Exactly.
you can read up on them in our new book coming out soon. But
Yep, absolutely.
yeah, but I
Which we
think
don't have a title for you.
we don't have a title even yet, but we're getting there.
The book's done. We just don't have a title.
Yeah, that's all. But it's just interesting. I think because we also found at conventions we have found that the criticism we got specifically about certain classes was that they weren't intense enough, and Chris and I we kind of always lead with this is going to be a good time for an hour and a half. You're going to have a lot of fun, and Chris is going to show you some cool stuff, and I'm going to make a lot of stupid jokes, but it's not a bloodletting. Like we're not if you're coming here to be voyeuristic and get off on somebody getting really hurt, go somewhere else, because that's not going to happen here, and we've never been about that. And I think that sometimes, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. There's this like badge of honor of like, look how hard I did this or I took this. And you and I walk through plenty of dungeons in our lives where we just keep walking because we're like, oh, whatever. I mean, I don't know. I just, whatever you're doing, if you're doing it and you're wholeheartedly into it, but if you're doing it so somebody recognizes you doing it, then I'm like, oh, what is that about? Right? Like, what is that? And I think that's, if we had anything to rail against in the community, that would be it. Right.
Absolutely. That's kind of like elitism.
Yeah.
Again, of like, well, I like to get, electrical play and bloodletting and, breath control, which, by the way, no one should ever be doing breath control. Period. It's one of the most dangerous things you possibly can do, and people die from it quite often.
People do. And we know a lot of people who've gotten in trouble and or got hurt or whatever. Avoid breath, any kind of breath play. And I know there are people that do it though, Chris, right? There's people that are devotees for it.
Yep.
They love
but
it.
Still, I mean, it's like, you have to know exactly what you're doing and have a long amount of experience. And even then there's always a risk that you're going to, someone's going to die.
I would say that's
anyway.
the thing. I would agree. I'd hate to say like one thing I'd say, well, you shouldn't do, but I would say that's the thing you really shouldn't be doing.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think right below that, just to sound like the old fart waving his finger at kids on his lawn, is rope bondage, because unfortunately it's everywhere. So when you type in bondage, you see endless pictures of like shibari and such. This is fine and dandy if you're an expert and you're playing with someone who is an expert on the receiving end, but it's something I think beginners should never do. It's way too dangerous. There's other options like vet wrap or saran wrap or other things, but rope is very dangerous because it can easily cut off circulation. It can do nerve damage. and it could take way too long for someone to get out of if they're in a panic situation or they're uncomfortable or hurting.
No kidding.
So that's my other like old man on the mountain thing. But
yeah, but no, Chris,
you know,
what
other-
Chris is
you know.
saying is very important. Very important, I think. And Chris, just before we don't get any further, tell people what shibari is so they know what we're talking about.
Oh, sure. Shibari is, I think it's basically defined as a Japanese practice of rope bondage. So if you
Right.
type in shibari, SHIB, how do you,
ARI?
RI, I think. I
Yeah.
think so. I mean, if you type in rope bondage, it'll just pop right up.
Right.
And it's very elaborate, and it can often involve things like suspension, which again is very risky. And it's just the reason why I'm a little crotchety about it is type in bondage, you often get so many pictures of this, and it's always, makes it look like, oh, it's just like macrame in a body, or something similar. But oh my God, unless you know exactly what you're doing, and
Yeah.
I don't mean reading and things, I mean, practicing with someone who's an expert
Yes.
until you can do it blindfolded. Don't do it. It's just way too risky. It's and that's another factor too. It's like what you just said perfectly is, don't play because you think it makes you look hot or cool. Play because you like what you're doing.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely. And like you said, because we saw a very good display of shibari at the Armory. And Chris and I have talked about the
Mhm.
Armory before. This it's a
Mhm.
structure that exists in San Francisco, and it's run by kink.com. But the people who were playing at this, they were doing a live demonstration. These people knew what they were doing. They were experts. First of all, you wouldn't get up in front of 100 people and do this thing unless you're expert. But they were experts, perfect experts. But what Chris is talking about, shibari or any kind of bondage for novices, is very dangerous, extremely dangerous, because for various reasons. I mean, just think about a rope. There's so many reasons why this is dangerous that it outweighs you wanting to even go there and play with it. And that's it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think that, and I hate to be the same way you're being, like, to get your bikes off my lawn, but what else can we say? I mean, there are things that are just really the same with impact play. We talk about this all the time. For those of you who don't know what we're talking about hitting somebody with an instrument or your hand. It's dangerous too.
Absolutely. I mean, it's on the safer side, but there's still plenty of places that never should be struck. The ass is the perfect place. Shoulders are next up, but you can't really slap a shoulder or use an impact play thing on a shoulder unless you really dial it back. And, because there are still bones in that area. What's great about the ass is no matter how hard you hit it, you're really not going to hurt somebody. I mean, yes, you could probably bruise someone or cause welting if you're using like a cane. And the big thing, of course, is to avoid the coccyx, which is the tailbone, because you never want to hit that, or the kidneys, which are just above, the ass cheeks. But if you stay on that area, you're pretty much okay. I mean, once again, unless you really go after somebody. But I've seen people getting caned on hands and feet, and that's totally dangerous. I mean, unless you're using a very soft and very low impact thing, the hands and feet are very fragile. It's way too easy to cause damage. And it's just one of those things, again, it's just like, I'm, not to sound like the old man again, but it's like, it's always better to play safe for a long time than play, needlessly intense and that you can only do it once because you hurt yourself somehow. So, no fantasy is worth like harming yourself or somebody else.
Well, and that's a very good point. What we have in our minds, this is one of the tenets of our book, actually, in the kink section. It's something we talk about all the time. What we have in our minds and fantasize about can be a chasm. There can be a chasm of difference between that and reality. And then when you get to reality, you're like, wait a minute, this is nothing like I thought, and good or bad. And I think that we have to be open to that possibility to say, maybe this is not a great idea now that I'm here. And there's a certain area just above the upper thigh to middle of the booty, which is great. That's the sweet spot. But you shouldn't be hitting people's. There's people that do. They hit. There's striking of genitals and breasts and all these things that if you're going to do that stuff, you, like Chris said, you better dial it back, because
Mm-hmm.
you may have an idea in your head what that's going to be like and what you want, and you get there and you're like, well, wait a minute, this is apples and oranges, man. This is nothing
Mm-hmm.
like I thought it was going to be. So you have to be very, very careful. And at the end of the day, I know I've seen the people in our classes, their eyes are glazing over sometimes. But Chris and I
Mm-hmm.
are not going to be deterred from saying safety, 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 and
Mm-hmm.
you want another dose of safety. I mean, we're not going to be
Absolutely.
deterred from that. And I don't care if
Mm-hmm.
you thought the class was too light and you didn't think we go. I don't care. I mean, it's just I'm not comfortable either in those classes to do demonstrations that are hardcore. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
not, Chris. I don't know about you. I just don't feel it's a place for it. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
I
and so
completely agree.
I
I
think people
completely
come to the
agree.
classes for that reason sometimes, but I don't think
Mm-hmm.
they're for that. And that's why I think at the end of the day, we enjoy our writing classes more than anything because we just stand there
Mm-hmm.
and you know, and we've always had good reactions in classes. I don't think it's that. It's just that we're just the kind of guys where, you know, there's just certain things that rail against our sensibilities, and mainly it's safety.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing that's like, going back to me, because I am obviously the most important person in the world.
Of course, of course.
The one thing I always took away from my early years in San Francisco was that they were very safety focused. Every class that I went to and everybody I talked to, that was
Yeah.
always the major focus. And I really kind of missed that because while a lot of people still bring it up, if you look at like a lot of online classes, if you look at a lot of like even convention things, they often have a tendency to drift towards the extreme side. And once again, I do think that's very dangerous because people who are new, who haven't had experience, they're gonna like think that's what's supposed to happen, as opposed
Mhm.
to instead of using elaborate shibari, they can use like vet wrap and saran wrap, and rather than brutal caning, to use something like a hand or a hairbrush. And they always
Yeah.
kind of like, they have a tendency to drift towards that extreme end because they think that's cooler than how things should be, when in reality it's just kind of, once again, kind of this attitude of extreme is better, and it just kind of bugs me.
Well, it's weird too because when we, man, and again, we're not coming down on the community because we love the community.
Yeah.
That's the
No, the
last thing
community
we
is
do.
wonderful.
Yeah.
The BDSM community is by and large a great bunch of
Yeah,
people.
they're wonderful, wonderful people. And but in the classes where I've seen this happen, is that Chris will mention something that you can do or use, and then somebody raises their hand and says, "Oh, you can do it this way." And we're always open to anybody's idea, right? We're like, "Oh, that's great. That's
Mhm.
really interesting." But then somebody else has to offer something that's more intense, and then the thing in the
Mhm.
room gets to be, "Well, let me top that with what I did." And let me,
Mhm.
and it was like, it gets to a point where like, oh wow, I did that, but I did this, and I'm like,
Mhm.
what are we trying? I don't know what we're trying to prove here. And these are adult people
Mhm.
acting like teenagers with trying to up one another, and that's the only thing. But I think that's true with any community. If you sit in a room with a bunch of community theater actors, each one's going to give you their resume.
Mhm.
So there's a natural, I not you and I don't do it because we're too evolved, but but we don't sit around giving people our credits. We just
Mhm.
don't. If somebody talks about our writing, it's not like, well, I had this published here and I had this published here. We just don't do that, again, because we're
Mhm.
way too evolved, and emotionally intelligent and just talented. But there is not. We don't need to one up. We certainly don't do it with each other, and we
Mhm.
don't. I've never seen you do it, and I know I don't do it in any. We've been in circumstances where somebody's talking a lot of shit, and we know they are,
Mhm.
and we don't eviscerate them. We don't try to cut them up. Cut with, oh, I did that too. We just
Mhm.
blindly just go along. Okay, whatever, that's cool.
Mhm.
So there's no need for you and I to do that. We don't seem to have to do that, and I guess because we're just confident in who we are and what we do. But in every community, if you get a bunch of people together who do the same thing, there's a whole bunch of always trying to get one up on the other person.
Mhm.
And in the kink community,
Absolutely.
I've seen that happen.
Oh, it's anything. It's basic human nature. I mean,
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
model train groups,
Right.
florists. I mean, everybody's going to have there's always this dynamic when you put a bunch of people together
Yes.
of trying to up themselves or trying to downplay something else. It's like I said, it's
Yes.
just kind of human nature. I think the reason why we're so self-deprecating is, it's kind of like, this is just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm proud of certain things I've done. I love working with you.
Right, me too. Me
But
too.
it's also like, I don't know. I mean, I just find that kind of arrogant approach kind of a turn off. I mean, the only time I ever could be guilty of it is when I send out a resume for like trying to get a writing gig because I want to impress the hell out of them.
You're trying to sell
So
yourself. That
I'll
makes
mention
sense.
everything, including like organ size. It's just like, yes,
Right.
my kidneys are a magnificent pinkish color and whatever. I mean, just
Right.
it's like I smell like peaches. There's anything because I'm trying to get the gig.
That
But
makes sense.
afterwards, it's like just I don't like a lot of self promotion. It's part of the game now, of course, but. I just find people who do it way too much. They come off as being arrogant and a little
Yeah.
defensive too. It's like, the only way they feel is like they always kind of look down on other people and mainly to boost themselves up. But it's like I mentioned before, just rambling here. But
No, I
the
agree
King
with you.
community is the very same way. I think it's better, frankly, than a lot of other communities.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
They're very respectful. They're very inclusive, by and large. There's always exceptions.
Right.
They always focus on safety and community. They
Yes.
often will donate the proceeds of an event to a charity. And they don't like price gouge either. I mean, when you go to a King convention, by and large, the amount of money you'll spend is what it takes to run the convention, as opposed to
Yes.
some organization that's going to get a lion's share of the money.
Yes.
And again, they always try and be like very inclusive and very supportive. And one of the other things about the King community I particularly like is it's very self-policing. So if you do something bad or something really inappropriate or do something that's not like safe, sane, and consensual, you'll probably get caught. And the community is very good
yeah.
about sort of like warning people and saying this person is, has problems or something similar. And I wish it was a little better in some ways because it's hard to do that with the internet. But I know particularly that, back in the, the 90s in San Francisco, if you acted out, you're going to be on a shit list. In fact, I remember several people like caused a scene at a party or were rude or something similar. It's like, they were just kind of like, pushed out in the wayside until they behaved themselves.
Well, and you got to be, it's just because there's discretion, right? That's first of all.
Absolutely.
Some people come to these conventions and the convention is, we've been in certain conventions who have taken over a whole hotel and
Oh, yes.
the general public's not allowed in for that weekend, and discretion is assured that people want to make sure of that, and safety. So there's the two big things, and you act out and you don't act correctly, and people don't want you around, and it just spoils the whole thing, But we've also been spoiled in the fact that the first convention we did together, and we did it twice, happened to be an experience that was fantastic for us both. We were flown there. We were fed with food and drink. We had our own.
We were
own
treated
rooms.
like kings.
It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. I still can't believe it. And Chris and I did it 2 years in a row. Or no, it was a year. I think it was a year between. And
I think there's a year gap. You're right.
Yeah, and it was just a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I want to do it again. But
It
we
was
can't
great.
do anything right now.
Right, but it was great.
Oh, they were
and
fantastic.
They were great, and they were just so happy to have us, and it was just one of those instances, and we kind of figure out what classes we want to do and what we were featuring, and let me cut in right here. This is Licking on Vanilla, by the way, with Ralph Greco Jr. and M. Christian, or Chris, as his friends call him, but you have to call him M. Christian because you're not his friend. Just want to let you know what that was, where you are, because we're going on today about entering the kingdom. I would say, right? Yep. That's the way of looking at it, and what you should be looking out for, and what you should do, and whatever your thing is, you're probably gonna. Would you say mostly that you're probably gonna find it?
Oh yeah,
generally
that's
speaking.
another thing I love about that's why I love about the King community too. And by the way, just to give a shout out, we're talking about a convention called Beat Me in St. Louis.
Yeah, Beat Me in St. Louis was the one we were talking about. That was wonderful.
Yep. Which I really, if you're in the area, I highly recommend you attend because it was a wonderful group and a wonderful convention. Not the other ones aren't wonderful, but they just sort of stand out.
Yeah, they did. They also do the Spanksgiving.
Yep.
Around that time of year, and they are wonderful. But anyway, and Chris, I'm glad Chris told you who they were because they do deserve a shout out. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, a really great bunch. Like I said, the other ones have been fine too, but
Yeah,
that one
great.
just sort of stands out. But yeah, it's just and I agree with you too. That's one thing about the community I really love too. It's like even though yes, they have a tendency to like kind of like put much pressure on the extreme side, they also really embrace almost anything as long as it's safe, sane, and consensual. So if you
Yes.
go to these conventions, very often they'll be like a dungeon, which is basically which is a weird thing to have a intense BDSM party in a room where the Lions Club met last month or something like that. And it always has that
Absolutely.
ugly orange carpet, and
Absolutely.
it's kind of jarring to walk into this space when it's like there's the St. Andrew's cross, there's the stalks, there's someone being bullwhipped, there's somebody who's being spanked, and we're in a room that looks like it's the Hilton. I mean, it's a hotel, so it's kind of weird. But yeah, it's like you'll also see things like there'll be like a pony, show with people playing as being horses.
Right.
There'll be a ball pit and playpens for the littles,
Yeah.
and there'll also be, like a queer focused, part of the convention, or there'll be, all kinds of different things. So it's very diverse, which is wonderful. It's not just black leather too. It's like you'll see people dressed in pink and tutus and glitter.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's wonderfully diverse. So that's what's so nice about it too. It's like if you're into something, whatever, you can go there and no one's going to look down on you. So if you're,
Right.
if you like being, if you like sitting on birthday cakes, more than likely there's more than one person there who also likes sitting on birthday
Oh,
cakes.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Chris just mentioned the Littles, and we happen to know some of them. And the Littles are men and women who play at being young at a convention. I mean, this is what they do. They
Yep.
play act, and they role play, and they wear diapers or jumpers, and they sit in the corner and color, and they suck on pacifiers, and that's what a Little is. And that's the thing about these spaces, these what they would call, I guess you want of a better term, is a safe space, that you can explore those role playing and being who you're not, whether you're dressing in a different gender, whether you're dressing up as an animal, whether you're dressing as not your age, and we all understand we're all adults, so we understand that what that is there. It's just people trying on the thing they like to do that makes them feel comfortable around in public, because they can't normally do that in public, and or at their job or whatever it is, and they're safe. They're safe in like Chris said. Usually those spaces are like they're like big ballrooms with the waffling wall separator, and they just open them all up, and it's just a big, well, like Chris said, the Rotary Club was there last week, or the quilters, the PA quilters, like something from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so it's an interesting way they do it, but everybody's, and there's often a medical room, which Chris and I avoid.
Oh yes, medical play.
Medical play that's another one of those things you should know what you're doing well.
Exactly.
Because that's a dangerous little thing to get into. And that's
I try not to be judgmental, but medical play makes me do a huge ick. But once again, I would never fault anyone for doing it, and I hope they have a good time and play safe. But just for me, it's like, oh, go, no.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on there that's just not my thing. I would say mostly everything that goes on there is not my thing on any kind of level. Because most things. And I don't want to call these people out, because I know people who, I don't know, I guess I know some people who did it. I had a client once who was doing that in that world, and that's great, but it's just that out of all the things that I can kind of understand or get close to, that's a thing I can't get close to. As far as my sensibilities, that's just on me personally, I just think it's a little too hardcore,
And again, it depends on what it is. I mean, I have kind of a needle phobia, so that sort of like rules that out. And I have a funny little story, because back once again when I was in San Francisco, there was this kind of like kink legend that the most weird, or not weird, but kind of the most intense people to play with were people who were EMTs or doctors.
Well, yeah, think about everything they've seen. They know exactly where to go, right? Yeah.
Exactly. They have no problem, doing all kinds of stuff, because they do it all the time. So,
yeah, right.
If you want to get like a, I don't know what, but, blood and, everything else they're the people to talk to. And it's so funny because people would often, joke about, oh my God, that person's an EMT.
Yeah, right. Because what are they capable of? Because that's what they do on a normal basis. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Because a lot of times we see with these things, people taking a vacation, so to speak, a sexual vacation at these conventions, woefully opposite of what their lives are. Some will go there like a high executive, male or female high executive in the business community, and come to one of these conventions and they completely are a complete sub. They want to be beaten and controlled and all that kind of stuff and humiliated, and which is something they do to people in their own way on a regular basis, right? So we see the opposites, extreme opposites, and then we also see people exploring a little bit about themselves that they, like you're saying, either they have this is their work or something that they do a little bit of in their natural life, and they explore it deeper with us in a sexual connotation,
Absolutely. And the one thing worth mentioning too, and this is something that you touched on, very well at the start, is another thing about the kink community is the idea that it's very private. So they have this kind of, actually not kind of, they have this, in place social rule that if you go to something like a kink convention, you're going to be there. I mean, everyone's going to see you and such. But if away from the convention, if you happen to run into someone you saw, the first thing you do is kind of ignore them. You certainly don't walk up to them in the middle of a shop, a grocery store, and say, "Hey, how was the convention where I saw you gotten flogged?" Because that person could be with their business partner, they could be there with their wife, their other partner, they could be with their mother, and so it's really uncool to do that. And so you do this kind of like little social dance. Like if you make eye contact, you smile, and if the other person smiles back, then you kind of approach a little bit and sort of make a little hi, how you doing? And it's because the one thing you never want to do is out somebody, because there's still some very serious risks of being public and in the kink scene. I mean, depending on where you live, you can lose jobs. You can lose custody of your kids.
Absolutely.
You can even go to jail. So some places have to be, some people and certain places just be very careful. Others are more tolerant. I mean, San Francisco, of course, except for one time when a party was that got raided, but that's a long story. But even St. Louis, I mean, they rent a whole hotel, and the hotel is perfectly fine with them, which I think is very cool too. That the convention events are usually like the kink community ones, because they're very good about self-policing. They don't get drunk and rowdy, and they always make sure that they clean up after themselves. So which hotel wouldn't?
Yeah, because like Chris is saying too, there's a certain policing that goes on in the dungeons by dungeon masters, DMs, and they're pretty good with kicking people out in their keisters if they're not acting correctly, or they're being they're being unusually dangerous, or and there's usually kind of it's kind of an unwritten rule about you're not walking into a dungeon with a beer in your hands. And you're usually frowned upon coming into those situations tipsy or buzzed, because it's just too dangerous. So there is a lot of that. Like there's a lot of that, and also what's fun too, like Chris was saying. Although we went to a convention in Vegas, and the first time that convention was in Vegas, it was in a regular hotel. And you had all these kinksters walking around the hotel. And in Vegas, nobody notices. Nobody even. At one point, you and I got on the elevator, and we were going up in there, and there was a couple of guys dressed as girls, and a couple other things going on, and very fanciful. Because I think the first time we went to that convention, their open suite was on the 18th floor. Remember, we went up to the upstairs, and I remember going up, and so everybody's going up in the elevator again, and you had regular hotel guests and you had kinksters that were there for the convention, and nobody even looked at them, because you're in Vegas. It's like another Thursday night in Vegas, so but there are a lot of the conventions I have been to, they have just rented out the whole hotel, which is wonderful. Then it's always fun to watch the hotel staff, but generally they know what's going on, and they're used to it. It's no big deal. And but it's nice when that happens, because then a real real high level discretion can be maintained,
Mm-hmm.
which is very important to everybody
And
who's
that's
going.
it. I think you're completely right, and I love that. I mean, it's so cool. I mean, particularly the ones that take the whole hotel are wonderful because what the management does, and again, this depends on the hotel. They actually offer the staff. So in other
Right.
words, the manager will talk to the staff and say, "Hey, this is going to be this convention this weekend. It's going to be kink. There'll be like public nudity." So they don't force them to work. They have
Yes.
they sort of like volunteer for it. And I remember at the last time we went to Beat Me in St. Louis, I actually got off the elevator and there was this person there who does like cleaning and such, and I chatted with them for a few minutes, and they were like, "Oh, we love this. You guys are always respectful.
Yes.
You always clean up
Yes.
after yourselves." I mean, because once again, consent is such a huge part of the BDSM community. They rarely get like hassled, and people always treat them with a great deal of respect, which I thought was really cool because once again, that consent thing is very important. So they don't treat it, they get treated much better than like drunken frat boys might or something similar. And I always think that's very touching. I mean, I always think that's really cool. In fact, Sin in the City said the same thing when we were there. They're saying, "Oh yeah, you guys are great." It's like, well, that's very cool to hear.
Yeah, because they had him back at least twice in the one hotel. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think because, it's all inclusive, everybody's there, mostly,
Mhm.
generally speaking, even in Las Vegas, although you and I are different, but generally speaking, it seemed to me when we were in Las Vegas and Chris is talking about the Sin in the City conventions, it seemed to me that a lot of the people who were there for the convention stayed in the hotel. They didn't they didn't really trip around so much. You and I did, but they didn't do so much of that. I think because they find what they want, they are where, they're together, and that's where they're staying. And that's saying a lot because you're in the middle of, say, now St. Louis was different because that hotel was a little bit further out, but Las Vegas is certainly, you can just walk out your door and be anywhere you want, which with the most, the highest level of distractions in the world, but I saw less people do that at a kink convention in Las Vegas, I think. And I think that's why the hotels want that, because they're like, all these people are staying here, they're eating here, they're doing, they're not leaving here. So we have them here, which is unusual for Las Vegas. Usually you just sleep in a hotel room and you leave. So I could have, because we would go, you and I would go usually walk through the lobby in the morning to go get coffee or something. And I noticed that a lot of the people who were at the convention were eating breakfast in the breakfast nook there.
Yep.
So they didn't travel so far beyond the hotel because they came to do what they were doing. It wasn't so much that they had Las Vegas there, which is interesting because you figured, shit, Las Vegas.
Absolutely. I agree with you. It's like, it's always interesting that people come and they basically just stay right there. And some people, go out, we can't be the only ones. And, but if you come there for a convention, frankly, I think Vegas would be a little tame afterwards. So and I remember seeing, like ads for like, strip clubs or, erotic shows. And at the time I remember thinking, it's like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like, what are you? It's Hopless show. Oh boy, I can see that walking through the lobby. Like kidding me. Yeah, it's very true. We Chris and I availed ourselves of because we don't get to see each other. So when we go to these things, we like to get out and about and walk around. So we go to Las Vegas. We like to go, and we have friends, clients, whatever. But generally speaking, yeah, there's nothing much on the strip that's going to attract you beyond what's going right on in the dungeon, And I think that's an interesting thing about the dichotomy of what Vegas is and what's happening there, But I really can't speak for every convention in the world because I've done a handful with and without you, and certainly more with you. I've always had great experiences. We've met wonderful people.
Absolutely. I think every convention I've gone to, it's nothing but a positive experience. I mean, some of them are better than others. Not to dish any particular one. You were talking before about like, running into people who were, not kinky in the elevator. I remember went to one convention. I didn't go very often because the thing about San Francisco conventions is it's pretty much every day is a Kink convention.
Yeah,
So
right.
the few times they sort of pop up, it's kind of like, it's like just an average Saturday night, as opposed to like someplace like Sin in the City or like Beat Me in St. Louis. It's like,
Right.
for people who are in the scene, that's the place to go. But it was funny because the hotel it was in, they didn't rent the whole hotel. And so they had like cordoned off areas. So if you went down a flight of stairs, suddenly you're in BDSM Fantasyland. If you went back up the stairs, there's a whole bunch of tourists from, Frostbite Falls, Minnesota.
Right.
So it definitely got some weird, and I love the fact their dealer's room was on a floor, as opposed to being in the convention area.
Okay.
So, you to get there, you'd either have to put on your civilian garb or just hope you don't run into somebody.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
who doesn't know what the hell's going on.
And that's fun too, because in those instances, the other guests get kind of a whiff of what's going on. Well, what's here this week? And like, oh well, we got the pipe fitters, and we got the the duck salesman, and then we have the kinksters, and people kind of get, and then it becomes almost like, well, let me try to catch some of these weirdos as they walk through the lobby, and we're always real good about that because we realize where people are coming from. So we Chris and I especially, we're always and Chris and I are never really all that much in any kind of kink regalia. We're just kind of just us. So we will. But the funny thing is that we've said this a million times, and it bears repeating because it'll be a good end to this show and also give people another insight of really how boring we are, because we are ridiculously boring. So the last time Chris and I go to, and I don't know if I may have told this story before, but the last time Chris and I went to Sin in the City in Las Vegas, that was the last time we were at that convention. And we get off the plane at different times. So Chris comes in, you came in from San Francisco or wherever. And yeah, you were living in that Bay Area, and I came from Jersey. So I landed, I think, before you, and kind of hung out around the hotel waiting for you. And then you came in a couple hours later, or maybe I stayed. Maybe we even met each other in McLaren. Maybe that's what we did too. Maybe one of us waited for the other one at McLaren.
I think so.
So Chris and I get in. We take whatever. There was a bus that took you back and forth to the hotel, and the hotel we were staying off was off the strip. Not that far off the strip, but enough off the strip. So Chris and I get in, and we get our badges and we didn't need no sticking badges, but we get our badges, and we did what we had to do. And then we were like, well, let's go get something to eat, and then we'll go to. I think at that point we went down to Fremont Street.
I think we did.
Know why we picked that night. So this is the first night Chris and I are in. It's a Friday night in Vegas. So I'm setting you up here. It's a Friday night in Vegas. Chris and I have just got off the plane. Chris took a longer time because remember you had to take the train into the San Francisco airport, and it took a while.
Yes, that took a while.
It was a long day for you. Not a long flight, but a long day to get to your flight. It's a 5-hour flight for me. We're not jet lagged exactly, but we're a little dopey. More dopey than we normally are. And we're usually pretty goddamn dopey. So anyway, we get down to Fremont Street and we go to there's a Container Store mall, right? We went down there.
That was wonderful. Yeah, I can't remember the name of it. It's really cool. It's made up of all shipping containers, and
it's a huge
praying mantis that spits fire, and it's
really
very cool. That's my favorite part. I think that and Fremont Street is actually my favorite part of Vegas.
So we did that, and Chris and I are walking Fremont, and now the hour's not different than you, but it's different for me. So I'm a little discombobulated what time it is, and it's starting to get dusky. But down there you can't tell because everything's lit up. But Chris and I we're obviously getting knackered. We got something to eat, right? We went to the Peppermill, and then we went down there. I think. Right. Okay.
Yes.
But we're knackered. We're pretty goddamn tired. And I looked at Chris, and I'm like, well, yeah, obviously we're tired because it's like 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. And Chris goes, you don't want me to tell you what time it is because you're going to feel like a fool. And I'm like, well, what time is it? He looks at his watch. He goes, Ralphie, it's 7 o'clock. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. And so like, we go back up. We get an Uber and get back to our hotel. And at this point, I think I know what I did. Before you came, I went to there's a big convenience store kind of pharmacy right near the hotel, and I got us snacks and stuff to drink, like waters and some Chex Mix snacks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
and I brought him to the hotel. So anyway, we get back to the hotel 7:15. There's nothing even going on. The dungeons aren't even up yet. It's only 7:15. We go back to our room, and Chris and I are sitting there with our shoes off, our sake feet up on the table, watching some bad TV, drinking water, and having our chat. And I remember taking a picture and sending it back home to people. I said, 7:30 Friday night Vegas. This is what we're doing, and I'm like, can we get any more boring? And like within the next 4 hours, the dungeons was open. And we were kept saying, we'll get there. We'll go and walk through. And I think you may have walked through, but it's a perfect example of like things are not what you think they are.
Oh yes,
because and that was not the first time that we were in bed by 9:30. I mean, granted, we had a class the next day too, but man, it's funny when you tell people what you do, like we do, and where we're going and what we're doing, and Chris is like, well, Chris is bringing all these different homemade instruments and toys for tit torture class. You tell people that, they think, oh my God, the life you guys lead. I'm like, yeah, we're in bed by 9:30 in Vegas on a Friday night. I mean, come on, man. Like, for us to even stay up to go to like a midnight show, we got to get sleep, man. Like it's just so funny. So it's just funny how that is, It's the perception.
Oh, absolutely. That's so wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. But you're right. It's like, it's funny because even though we both have played in the scene, we both had, done a lot of pretty, to be generic, kinky shit. It's more like, it's more like, it's something we do, and the conventions are kind of an excuse to get together. In fact, we often joked about that.
Yeah.
Saying, it's like the teaching is fun. It's always a blast. And going to the conventions is always, really, really fun. But mostly it's just to hang out with each other. So, it's so, we're not the first person in line to get into the dungeon room. We're not plopping down, hundreds of bucks at the dealer's room.
Right.
And I hate to say this, we don't take any other classes.
Yeah, we don't.
But so for us, it was kind of funny. I mean, we still have a good time, and I really want to do more of them. But it's just kind of like, well, it's this. This is, we're actually going because we like hanging out, and we like going to the cities where this is taking place. I mean,
oh, that's wonderful. That's so wonderful.
Oh, we had so much fun. Oh God, so much fun in Vegas, and we also had a blast in St. Louis.
Oh my God,
because we hooked up with a wonderful person who was basically kind of like their driver. What was their name? Rosie.
Rosie. Oh no, that was
a dream.
Rosie was unbelievable. We had the greatest.
Oh, Rosie
time.
was fantastic. One time, I remember we went out. We went to barbecue places, which was a blast. We walked around downtown St. Louis, which was wonderful. We went to that crazy ass museum.
Yeah,
but
that was
also
cool.
Rosie dragged us out at midnight to go to this one little diner.
Oh, it was great. It was a cool diner with this waitress was like this saucy little waitress with really big boobs, and she was just and she was just fun, and it was like, but it was a great diner. The food was great. You paid nothing for all this food, but it was like in the middle of you never find it. And Rosie found it and we were jawing with Rosie, and it was just, that's the thing about these conventions, you meet some great people,
Absolutely.
And, we just have such a great time, and I agree. I mean, I for us, it's really the hanging out part. That's what, it's like, I can hang out with Chris for a weekend. What could be better? Like, it's fantastic, But it's funny. One time too, I remember the only time we ever really walked through a dealer's room with any kind of interest was you had to buy yourself a belt. Yes. I think you needed a belt. You're like, shit, I don't have I forgot my belt or whatever. So we were walking through. You're like, I got to get a belt. Like, legitimately, Chris had to get a belt for his pants. He needed a belt not to strike somebody. He needed for his pants. So like, it was like one of those instances. Yeah, but it's just funny because again, it's like, it's not what you think it is. It's like, it's the things that are, it's weird and kind of mundane in a lot of ways, So it's just, but we've had some good times, and we'll get more into.
Oh, it's always fun.
We'll get more into the exactitudes of certain kinks. We will and over the shows, but we didn't have a guest for today, and I figured let me just get on here with Chris and Joe a little
always
bit.
Delightful, always fun.
Yeah, and we hope you're having a good time listening to Licking Non-Vanilla. We're having a great time producing
because we're having a blast.
Yeah, and we know we're spreading around across the world a little bit, and that's always good, and we're gaining new listeners all the time. And go to the website too. It's lickingnonvanilla.com. Yes. To read up on, I usually post blogs once or twice a week, and you could reach us there, and you could write us there, and we'd love to hear from you. That's for sure.
Absolutely. If you need ideas for shows, if you want to give some
Absolutely.
feedback, definitely drop us a line.
Yeah.
We're more than willing. And we're also going to do an online erotica writing class, probably next month, maybe sometime.
We're hoping to do that very soon. Yeah. And
Yep.
we'll give you more details about that as well.
Mhm.
But that's, we're just trying every avenue we can to reach out and connect with people, which is
Absolutely.
So this has been Licking Non-Vanilla with Ralph Greco Jr. and
Chris, otherwise known as M. Christian.
we had a wonderful time today, didn't we, Chris?
Absolutely. Always a blast.
Yes. All right, we'll see you next time, kiddies, my little droogs, and we're signing out. Goodbye.
Bye.
And visit us on the web at www.lickingnonvanilla.com.